The snow came down hard that evening as Danny Cole made his way back to the cabin. He was 14 years old and had lived alone in these mountains for 6 months now, ever since his grandmother passed away in her sleep one cold February night. The cabin was small and old, built by his grandfather 50 years ago, but it was home. It was all he had left. Danny carried a rabbit he had caught in one of his traps. It would make a good stew for the next few days. He walked through the deep snow with practiced ease, his boots crunching against the frozen ground. The wind howled through the pine trees and sent ice crystals swirling through the air. It was a bad storm, one of the worst he had seen this winter. He reached the cabin just as the last light faded from the sky. The small wooden structure sat in a clearing surrounded by tall pines. Smoke should have been rising from the chimney, but the fire had gone out while he was away. Danny sighed and pushed open the door. That was when he heard the sound. It came from behind the cabin near the woodpile, a soft cry, almost like a wounded animal. Danny set down the rabbit and grabbed the old flashlight from the shelf by the door. He stepped back outside into the storm. The beam of light cut through the falling snow. Danny walked around the side of the cabin, his heart beating faster. He did not know what he expected to find. Maybe a deer that had been injured by a mountain lion. Maybe nothing at all. What he found was a girl. She was lying in the snow beside the woodpile, curled into a ball. Her skin was blue, not from the cold but naturally blue, the color of a summer sky. Her hair was white like fresh snow, and when she opened her eyes they were silver and filled with fear. She wore thin robes that offered no protection against the mountain winter. She was clearly not human. Danny had seen aliens before. The town 20 miles down the mountain had a few alien residents, mostly traders and a mechanic who fixed farming equipment. First contact had happened 50 years ago, before Danny was born, and aliens were now a normal part of life on Earth. But he had never seen one this close, and certainly not one lying half-frozen in his backyard. The girl tried to speak, but her words came out as a weak whisper. Danny did not hesitate. He knelt down and lifted her from the snow. She weighed almost nothing, lighter than he expected. He carried her inside the cabin and laid her on the old couch near the fireplace. Danny worked quickly. He started a fire with the dry wood he kept inside, and within minutes the flames were crackling and sending warmth into the small room. He found his grandmother's old quilt and wrapped it around the alien girl. Then he boiled water and made hot tea. The girl watched him with those silver eyes. She was shivering badly, her whole body trembling. Danny brought the tea and helped her sit up enough to drink it. She took small sips, her hands shaking around the cup. After a long time, she spoke. Her English was broken but understandable. She said her name was. She had been traveling with her father when bad people attacked them. She ran into the mountains and got lost. She had been wandering for 2 days with no food and no shelter. Danny listened without interrupting. When she finished, he simply nodded and went to heat some soup he had made the day before. He brought her a bowl and watched her eat. She was starving, that much was clear. Asked him why he was helping her. She said she had been told that humans in remote areas were dangerous, that they did not like aliens, that they could not be trusted. Danny thought about this for a moment. Then he said that he had been told aliens were strange and could not be trusted either, but she just looked cold and scared to him. She looked like someone who needed help. That was enough. Stared at him like she did not understand. Maybe she did not. Danny did not try to explain further. He just asked if she wanted more soup. As the night went on, grew stronger. The warmth returned to her blue skin and her shivering stopped. She told Danny more about what happened. Her father was an ambassador, a diplomat working to create peace between the and other species. They were traveling to a meeting when a ship attacked them. The attackers were a species known for raiding and taking hostages for ransom. Did not know if her father was alive. She did not know if anyone else from the convoy had survived. She only knew that she had run and kept running until she collapsed in the snow behind a small wooden cabin. Danny walked to the window and looked out at the storm. The snow was beginning to slow down. By midnight, it would stop completely. The clouds would clear and the stars would come out. And then anyone tracking would be able to follow her trail right to this cabin. He turned back to and told her they needed to leave. They would be coming. They would follow her footprints in the snow once the storm stopped. But Danny knew these mountains better than anyone. His grandfather had taught him every trail, every hidden path, every secret way through the peaks. He could get her to the ranger station on the other side of the mountain before dawn. There would be help there, communication equipment, people with weapons. Looked frightened. She asked if it was far. Danny said it was about 15 miles, but he knew shortcuts that would make it faster. It would be hard walking in the cold and dark, but they could make it. Asked why he would do this, why he would risk his life for a stranger he had just met. Danny did not have a complicated answer. He said that when his grandmother was dying, a doctor from the town clinic drove up the mountain in the middle of a blizzard to try to help her. The doctor could not save her, but he came anyway. He tried anyway. Danny remembered that. He looked at with calm eyes. He said that someone helped him once. Now he would help someone else. That was how it was supposed to work. Was quiet for a long moment. Then she nodded and pushed herself up from the couch. She was still weak, but there was determination in her silver eyes now. Danny began to prepare for the journey. It was going to be a long night, and they were coming. But Danny Cole had survived alone in these mountains for 6 months. He had buried both his grandparents and kept living. He was not afraid of the dark or the cold or the things that hunted in the night. He would get this girl to safety. That was all that mattered now. Danny moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency. He had done this kind of preparation many times before, packing for hunting trips that lasted several days. But this was different. This time he was not hunting. This time he was being hunted. He found his grandmother's old winter coat in the closet. It was thick and warm, lined with wool that she had sewn in herself years ago. He brought it to and helped her put it on. The coat was too big for her thin frame, but it would keep her alive in the mountain cold. Her feet were a problem. Wore thin shoes made of some alien material that offered no protection against snow. Danny found an extra pair of his own boots, stuffed them with cloth to make them fit her smaller feet, and wrapped more cloth around her ankles for warmth. It was not perfect, but it would work. Danny packed a small bag with supplies, dried meat, a water bottle, matches, a knife, and his flashlight. He loaded his hunting rifle and slung it over his shoulder. The rifle was old but reliable. His grandfather had taught him to shoot when he was 8 years old. They left the cabin just before midnight. The snow had stopped falling and the clouds were breaking apart to reveal a sky full of stars. The mountain air was cold and sharp, biting at their exposed skin. Danny led the way and followed close behind. The trail Danny chose was not marked on any map. It wound through the forest along the ridge line, hidden by trees and rocks. His grandfather had shown him this path when Danny was just a boy. They had walked it together many times, talking about the mountains and the animals, and the way the world used to be before the aliens came. Struggled at first. She was not used to walking through deep snow, and her body was still weak from 2 days of wandering lost in the cold. But she did not complain. She kept moving, one step at a time, following Danny through the darkness. After an hour of walking, Danny slowed his pace. He could tell needed rest even though she would not ask for it. They stopped in a small clearing where a fallen tree provided shelter from the wind. Danny brushed snow off a log and they sat down. Looked up at the stars. She said they were beautiful, different from the stars she saw from her home world, but beautiful all the same. Danny asked her about her home, smiled sadly and described a planet with purple skis and 3 moons. She talked about cities that floated above vast oceans and forests that glowed with natural light at night. It sounded like a dream to Danny, like something from the stories his grandmother used to read to him. Asked about his life in return, Danny did not have much to tell. He said his parents had died in an accident when he was 4 years old. His grandparents had raised him here in this cabin, far from the towns and cities below. His grandfather had died 3 years ago, and his grandmother followed 6 months back. Now he lived alone. Asked if he was lonely, Danny thought about it and said that sometimes he was, but the mountains kept him company. The animals, the trees, the streams, the snow. They were all friends in their own way. They continued walking. The trail grew steeper as they climbed higher into the mountains. Danny helped over difficult spots, holding her hand as they crossed icy rocks and narrow ledges. She trusted him completely, following wherever he led without question. Around 2 in the morning, they reached the most dangerous part of the journey. A narrow path cut across the face of a cliff, barely wide enough for one person to walk. Below the path was a drop of several hundred feet into darkness. One wrong step would mean death. Danny went first. He tested each foothold carefully, making sure the snow and ice would hold his weight. Then he turned and reached out his hand too. She took it and began to cross. Halfway across, her foot slipped. She gasped and started to fall toward the edge. Danny grabbed her arm and pulled her back against the cliff wall. For a moment they stood there, pressed against the cold rock, their breath coming fast. Then Danny nodded and they continued, more carefully now. When they reached the other side, sat down on a rock. Her hands were shaking, and not just from the cold. She said she had never been so scared in her life. Danny sat beside her. He said that fear was normal. Fear kept people alive. The trick was to keep moving even when you were afraid. Looked at him with curiosity in her silver eyes. She asked how a human boy so young had become so wise. Danny almost laughed. He said he was not wise. He just paid attention. The mountains taught you things if you listened. They rested for a few minutes, then continued on. The ranger station was still many miles away, and dawn was only a few hours off. Danny pushed the pace as much as he dared without exhausting completely. As they walked, told him about the concept of Shan and her culture. It meant the debt of life. When someone saved your life, you owed them a debt that could never truly be repaid. She said she now owed this debt to Danny. Danny shook his head. He said he did not want any debt. He did not want repayment or reward. He just wanted her to be safe. That was enough for him. Did not understand this. Among her people, debts were taken very seriously. They were sacred bonds that connected one person to another across time and space. How could Danny simply refuse such a connection? Danny did not have a good answer. He said that where he came from, you helped people because it was right, not because you expected something back. His grandmother had taught him that. She said the world was hard enough without people keeping score. They were crossing a small frozen stream when Danny stopped suddenly. He held up his hand for to be quiet. Then he turned and looked back the way they had come. Far below, in the valley they had left behind, there were lights. Not stars, but torches or flashlights moving through the trees. Someone was following them. Someone was tracking their path through the snow. They had found their trail. Danny grabbed his hand and started moving faster. They had maybe an hour before the hunters caught up to them, maybe less. The ranger station was still too far away. But Danny Cole had grown up in these mountains. He knew places they would never find. He knew paths that did not appear on any map. He knew how to survive when everything was against him. He would not let them catch. He had made a promise to himself, and he intended to keep it. Danny pulled through the trees at a pace that left them both gasping for breath. The lights behind them were growing brighter, closer. They were fast, faster than Danny had expected. But they did not know these mountains. That was the only advantage Danny had, and he intended to use it. He led into a narrow canyon where the snow had drifted deep against the walls. They waded through powder that reached up to their waists, pushing forward with every ounce of strength they had. The deep snow would slow them down. It would hide their footprints and make tracking more difficult. On the other side of the canyon, Danny found the rocky slope he was looking for. The wind had blown the ground nearly bare here, leaving exposed stone and frozen dirt. They climbed quickly, leaving almost no trail behind them. Anyone following would lose their tracks in this place. Was struggling badly now. Her breathing was ragged and her steps were becoming unsteady. Danny slowed down and took her arm, supporting her as they climbed. She tried to apologize, but he cut her off. He told her to save her breath. They still had a long way to go. They reached a small plateau and stopped to rest behind a large boulder. Danny scanned the valley below with careful eyes. He could see the lights more clearly now. There were many of them spread out in a line, moving methodically through the forest. They were searching every possible path, leaving nothing to chance. Danny counted the lights. There were at least 30 of them. 30 hunters pursuing one human boy and one alien girl through the frozen mountains in the middle of the night. The odds were not good. Huddled against the rock, her thin body shaking despite the heavy coat, Danny pulled out the dried meat from his pack and gave her some. She ate without speaking, her silver eyes fixed on the lights below. Danny told her stories while they rested. He talked about his grandfather, who had built the cabin with his own hands. He talked about his grandmother, who could cook the best apple pie in the whole county. He talked about the deer that visited the clearing behind the cabin every spring, and the eagles that nested in the tall pine at the edge of the forest. Listened and slowly stopped shaking. The stories seemed to calm her, to take her mind away from the hunters closing in below. She asked Danny to tell her about the stars, and he pointed out the constellations his grandfather had taught him. The Big Dipper, Orion, the North Star that always showed the way home. They could not rest for long. Danny helped to her feet and they continued climbing. He was taking them higher into the mountains now, toward a place he knew well. A small cave hidden behind a waterfall that had frozen solid for the winter. They could shelter there and wait for it to pass. The climb was hard. Danny felt the exhaustion in his own legs, the ache in his muscles from hours of walking through snow and ice, but he pushed through it. He had been tired before. He had been cold before. He had been scared before. None of that had ever stopped him. They reached the cave just as the first hint of gray began to appear on the eastern horizon. Dawn was coming, and with it, the end of the darkness that had hidden them. Danny led behind the frozen waterfall and into the small space beyond. It was dry and sheltered from the wind, warmer than the open air outside. Danny gave the last of the dried meat and water. She protested, saying he needed to eat too, but he shook his head. He said he was fine. He could go longer without food than she could. Right now she needed strength more than he did. Looked at him with wonder in her silver eyes. She said she did not understand him. She had been taught that humans were unpredictable and often cruel, that they looked out for themselves above all else. But Danny was nothing like that. Danny was the kindest person she had ever met. Danny shifted uncomfortably. He was not used to compliments. He said he was not special. He was just doing what any decent person would do. His grandmother had always said that character was what you did when no one was watching. Out here in the mountains, no one was watching. This was just who he was. Was quiet for a moment. Then she said that maybe that was what made humans special. They did not need anyone watching to do the right thing. Outside the cave, they heard voices. Harsh sounds in a language Danny did not recognize. They had followed them up the mountain. They were close now, searching the rocks and trees, looking for any sign of their prey. Danny motioned for it to stay silent. He crept to the edge of the cave and peered out through the frozen waterfall. He could see shapes moving in the dim light, tall gray figures with weapons in their hands. They were spreading out, checking every possible hiding spot. One of them walked directly past the waterfall. Danny held his breath. The ice obscured the cave entrance, but if they looked closely, he might see the opening behind it. They stopped. He turned and stared at the waterfall. Danny felt's hand grip his arm, her fingers trembling with fear. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then they turned away and continued on, disappearing into the trees beyond. Danny let out a slow breath. They were safe for now, but they were not giving up. They would search the entire mountain if they had to. Sooner or later, they would find the cave. He looked at and made a decision. The ranger station was still 2 miles away on the other side of a frozen lake. If could get there, she would be safe. But she could not get there alone, not with everywhere. Danny told her the plan. He would lead the way, draw them in the opposite direction, would follow the lake to the ranger station and call for help. It was the only way. Refused immediately. She grabbed his arm and said she would not leave him. He had saved her life. She would not let him throw his away. Danny looked at her with calm eyes. He said he was not throwing his life away. He knew these mountains better than anyone alive. The did not. He could survive out there. He could lead them on a chase until help arrived. Had tears in her silver eyes now. She said he was just a boy. He could not fight 30 raiders alone. Danny smiled slightly. He said he was not going to fight them. He was going to outrun them. There was a difference. He gave her the small flashlight and pointed toward the lake. He told her to follow the shoreline to the far end. The ranger station would be visible from there, a building with a tall antenna on the roof. She just had to get there and tell them what was happening. Threw her arms around him in a desperate embrace. She whispered that she would never forget him, that she would come back with help, that he had to survive. Danny hugged her back briefly, then gently pushed her away. He told her to run and not look back. Then he stepped out of the cave, raised his rifle toward the sky and fired. The sound of the rifle shot echoed across the mountains like thunder. Every within a mile heard it. Every turned toward the sound, and that was exactly what Danny wanted. He ran, not toward the lake where was heading, but deeper into the mountains, higher up the slopes, away from any path they might know. Behind him he heard shouts in that harsh alien language, and then the sound of heavy footsteps crashing through the snow. The chase had begun. Danny knew these mountains the way he knew his own heartbeat. Every rock, every tree, every hidden trail was familiar to him. He moved through the darkness with the confidence of someone who had spent his entire life in this place. They were strong and fast, but they were strangers here. They did not know where the ground was solid and where it would collapse beneath their feet. They did not know which paths led forward and which led to dead ends. He led them toward the old logging road that cut across the northern face of the mountain. The road had not been used in decades, and it was covered in snow and fallen trees. Danny slipped through the obstacles easily, ducking under branches and jumping over logs. Behind him, they struggled, their large bodies catching on every obstacle. The first light of dawn was breaking over the eastern peaks now. Danny could see the shadows retreating as the sun began its slow climb into the sky. It should have made him easier to spot, but it also let him see the terrain better. He adjusted his path, heading toward a place he knew well. The snow bridge was exactly where he remembered it. A narrow span of packed snow stretched across a deep crevasse, hidden among the rocks near the summit. Danny's grandfather had shown him this place years ago, warning him about the danger. The bridge looked solid, but it was not. Only certain parts could bear weight. Step in the wrong place and you would fall into the darkness below. Danny crossed the bridge carefully, stepping only on the spots he knew were safe. He reached the other side and waited, watching. The first appeared moments later. He was tall, nearly 7 feet, with gray skin and black eyes that reflected no light. He saw Danny standing on the other side of the crevasse and smiled with teeth that were sharp like knives. Then he stepped onto the snow bridge. Danny watched as they walked forward, confident that the bridge would hold. For a moment it did. Then they took one step too many, and the snow beneath his feet collapsed. They screamed as he fell into the darkness. 2 more had followed him onto the bridge, and they fell too, grabbing at the crumbling snow as it gave way beneath them. Danny did not stay to watch. He turned and ran. Commander heard the screams of his soldiers and felt something he had not felt in many years. He felt uncertainty. This human child, this small creature from a backward planet, was defeating his raiders in their own hunt. Was the leader of the raiders. He had destroyed ships and conquered settlements across 3-star systems. He had taken hostages worth millions in ransom money. He had never once failed to catch his prey. But this boy, this orphan living alone in the frozen mountains, was making fools of his best hunters. Ordered his remaining soldiers to spread out and surround the area. They would trap the human and close in from all sides. There would be no more chasing through unfamiliar terrain. They would corner him like the animal he was. Danny felt the change in the hunt. They were no longer following directly behind him. They were moving to the sides, trying to cut off his escape routes. He adjusted his path again, climbing higher, looking for another advantage. He found it near the summit, a field of loose boulders balanced precariously on a steep slope. Danny climbed carefully among the rocks, testing each one before putting his weight on it. He knew that one wrong move would send an avalanche of stone crashing down the mountainside. They followed. They were more cautious now, suspicious of every step. But they were also angry, eager to catch the human who had killed their comrades. They climbed too fast, pushed too hard. Danny watched from above as one of them stepped on a loose boulder. The rock shifted, then began to roll. It knocked into another boulder, and suddenly half the slope was moving, a thundering cascade of stone and snow rolling down the mountain. 3 more disappeared beneath the avalanche. Danny kept moving. His legs were burning now and his lungs ached with every breath. He had been running for hours, climbing through snow and rock and ice, but he could not stop. Not yet. Not until he knew was safe. The sun was fully up now, painting the mountain peaks in shades of gold and pink. Danny reached a cliff edge and stopped. There was nowhere left to go. Below him was a sheer drop of hundreds of feet. Behind him, the remaining were closing in. Commander emerged from the trees, his weapon drawn. He was alone now, having sent his soldiers around to block any escape. But he wanted to face this human boy himself. He wanted to understand how such a small creature had caused so much destruction. Walked slowly toward Danny, his black eyes studying the boy with cold interest. He asked where the girl had gone. Danny said nothing. Raised his weapon, a device that crackled with energy. He said he would ask one more time. Where was the girl? Danny stood at the edge of the cliff, the wind whipping through his hair. He looked at the commander without fear. He thought about running toward the ranger station. He thought about his grandmother dying peacefully in her bed. He thought about all the people who had helped him throughout his life, expecting nothing in return. He said he did not know where the girl was. Even if he did, he would not tell. Smiled coldly. He said that was unfortunate. He raised his weapon to fire. And then the sky filled with light. Aircraft appeared over the mountain, human aircraft with weapons and searchlights. On the slopes below, vehicles were climbing toward them, emergency lights flashing. Danny felt something he had not allowed himself to feel all night. He felt hope. Looked at the approaching aircraft and realized his raid had failed. The human child had delayed them long enough for help to arrive. Fighting now would be suicide. He lowered his weapon and turned to face Danny one last time. He asked why. Why would a human child risk death for an alien stranger? What possible reason could there be? Danny looked at the commander with tired eyes. He said it was simple. She needed help. That was reason enough. Stared at him for a long moment. Then he shook his head slowly and turned away. He ordered his remaining soldiers to surrender. Danny sat down on a rock and watched the sun rise over his mountains. He was exhausted, hungry, cold, and covered in scratches from his flight through the forest. But he was alive, and somewhere down below was safe. That was all that mattered. Sheriff Pete had been working in these mountains for 20 years. He had seen blizzards and wildfires and accidents that would make most men turn pale, but he had never seen anything like this. A 14-year-old boy, alone and armed with nothing but an old hunting rifle, had led 30 raiders on a chase through the frozen peaks and survived. The sheriff climbed the last stretch of slope and found Danny sitting on a rock near the cliff edge. The boy looked exhausted, his face red from the cold and his clothes torn from running through the forest. But his eyes were calm, steady. He looked up as the sheriff approached and asked a single question. "Is safe?" Nodded. He said the girl had reached the ranger station about an hour ago. She had told them everything, about the attack on her convoy, about the boy who saved her life, about the raiders hunting them through the mountains. Had called for backup immediately, and they had tracked to this location using thermal scanners. Danny let out a long breath, the tension finally leaving his shoulders. He said that was good. That was all he wanted to know. The sheriff helped Danny to his feet and led him down the mountain. Below them, raiders were being placed in restraints by human soldiers. The aliens looked battered and humiliated, their gray skin covered in cuts and bruises from their chase through unfamiliar terrain. Commander was among them, standing in silence as soldiers secured his wrists. One of the soldiers approached the sheriff and said they had found the bodies of several who had fallen into a crevasse. Others had been buried under a rockslide. In total, 9 of the 30 raiders had been killed during the chase. Looked at Danny with disbelief in his eyes. He asked how a boy had managed to do all this. Danny just shrugged. He said the mountains did most of the work. He just led to the right places. They continued down the slope toward the ranger station. As they walked, told Danny what had happened to the convoy. Most of the diplomats had survived the initial attack. Ambassador's father had been injured but was alive and on his way to the ranger station. They had planned to hold the diplomats for ransom, but their raid had fallen apart when escaped into the mountains. Danny listened without comment. He was tired, more tired than he could ever remember being. But beneath the exhaustion, he felt something else. He felt a strange kind of peace. The ranger station came into view, a small building with a tall antenna rising from its roof. Vehicles were parked outside, and people were moving everywhere, soldiers and medics and officials in suits. Danny had never seen so many people in one place. And then he saw. She came running out of the station the moment she spotted him. Her blue skin was flushed with emotion, and tears were streaming from her silver eyes. She threw herself at Danny, wrapping her arms around him in a tight embrace. She said she thought he was dead. She said she watched the aircraft fly toward the mountains and prayed to every deity she knew that they would find him alive. She said she would never be able to thank him enough for what he had done. Danny held her for a moment, then gently stepped back. He said she did not need to thank him. He said he was just glad she was okay. A tall man approached them. He had the same blue skin and silver eyes but his face was older, lined with worry and exhaustion. His arm was in a sling, and bandages covered part of his head. This was Ambassador's father. Stood before Danny and looked at him for a long time without speaking. Then he knelt down so that they were at eye level, a gesture of profound respect in culture. He said that words could not express his gratitude. His daughter was everything to him, the only family he had left since his wife passed away 5 years ago. Danny had risked his life, faced 30 armed raiders, survived a night in the frozen mountains, all to save a stranger he had never met. Asked why? What could possibly motivate such sacrifice for someone he did not know? Danny thought about the question. He thought about his grandmother, who had taught him to be kind even when kindness was hard. He thought about the doctor who had driven through a blizzard to try to save her life. He thought about all the small acts of goodness he had witnessed over the years, the moments when people chose to help each other for no reason other than it was right. He said it was simple, needed help, he was there, so he helped. That was what people were supposed to do. Remained kneeling, his silver eyes studying Danny with something like wonder. He said that he had traveled to many worlds and met many species. Some were cruel, some were kind, and most were somewhere in between. But humans continued to surprise him. Such capacity for destruction, and yet such capacity for compassion. He said he had heard stories about humans, about their wars and their cruelty and their violence. But he had also heard stories like this one. Stories of humans who risked everything for strangers, who faced impossible odds for no reward, who did the right thing simply because it needed to be done. He said that if more humans were like Danny Cole, the galaxy would be a very different place. Danny did not know how to respond to that. He just shrugged and said he was nothing special. He was just a boy who lived in the mountains. Took his hand and squeezed it tightly. She said he was wrong. He was the most special person she had ever met. The morning sun rose higher over the mountains, warming the cold air and melting the frost on the trees. People continued to move around the ranger station, dealing with the aftermath of the failed raid. But Danny stood apart from it all, looking out at the peaks that had been his home for his entire life. Sheriff approached and offered to take Danny down to the town. There would be questions, paperwork, probably some kind of reward. Danny nodded absently but did not move. Stood beside him, watching the same mountains. She said that when all this was over, when her father's diplomatic work was finished, she wanted to come back. She wanted to see these mountains properly, without chasing them. She wanted Danny to show her the trails his grandfather had taught him, the places where deer gathered in spring, the eagle's nest in the tall pine. Danny looked at her and felt something warm in his chest. He had been alone for so long, living by himself in the cabin his grandfather had built. He had accepted that loneliness as the price of his freedom, the cost of living in the mountains he loved. But standing here now, with beside him and the sun rising over the peaks, he realized that maybe he did not have to be alone anymore. Maybe helping one stranger could change everything. He told he would like that. He said the mountains were beautiful in summer, when the snow melted and the wildflowers bloomed. He said he would show her his favorite places, the hidden waterfalls and secret meadows that only he knew. Smiled, her silver eyes bright with hope. She said it was a promise. Danny smiled back. He said it was. Then he turned and walked toward the waiting vehicles, leaving the mountains behind for now. But he knew he would return. He always returned. These peaks were his home, the place where his family had lived and died, the land that had shaped him into who he was. And now they were something more. They were the place where a lonely orphan boy had reminded an entire galaxy what humanity could be at its best, not through strength or technology or wealth, but through simple kindness offered freely to a stranger in need. That was the human way. That was what made them special. Danny Cole had learned that lesson from his grandparents, and now he had passed it on. One act of kindness at a time, changing the universe for the better. The sun rose higher, and a new day began.